Behind him, the soft click of heels announced Clara's entrance. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to grand rooms and charitable galas, her silk robe cinched at the waist, her hair still damp from a late bath. "You're home late," she said, her voice gentle but edged with something unspoken. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. Daniel didn't turn. Board meeting ran long. Clara paused, watching him. She knew better than to press. They'd danced this dance for months, maybe years. Polite words, shared spaces, separate beds. Once, they'd whispered dreams into each other's ears beneath tangled sheets. Now, they exchanged pleasantries over breakfast like distant colleagues. She walked closer, stopping just behind him. "The foundation gala is in 3 weeks. The committee wants you there." "I'll be there," he replied automatically. "You say that," she murmured, "but you haven't attended a single event with me in over a year." He finally turned, meeting her eyes, deep brown, intelligent, tired. "Clara, I'm trying. Trying to do what, Daniel?" Her voice broke just slightly. "Stay married? Or just stay out of trouble?" He looked away, jaw tightening. He wanted to tell her everything. The loneliness, the suffocation of perfection. The way his chest ached for something real, even if it was messy. But he didn't know how, so he said nothing. Clara exhaled slowly, smoothing her robe. "I married you because I believed you had a heart beneath all that ambition. Don't make me regret it." She turned and walked away, her footsteps fading into the quiet hum of the penthouse. Alone again, Daniel returned to the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Lovers holding hands under umbrellas, strangers sharing laughter in taxis, families rushing home to warm dinners. He had everything the world said he should want. Fortune, power, a beautiful wife. And yet, he felt like a ghost in his own life. It was in that hollow ache that he'd met Livia 3 months earlier, at a corporate retreat in the mountains, where she'd been hired as a temporary event coordinator. She hadn't known who he was at first, hadn't cared. She'd laughed at his dry jokes, challenged his assumptions, looked at him like he was just a man, not a brand, not a name on a building. He remembered the way her eyes had lit up when she talked about her dream of opening a small bookstore by the sea. "Not because it'll make money," she'd said, "but because stories heal people." He hadn't realized how starved he was for sincerity until he heard her say those words. Now, standing in his sterile penthouse, he pulled out his phone, scrolled to her number, stared at it for a long moment, then locked the screen again. He told himself it was for the best, that he owed Clara loyalty, that a man like him didn't get to rewrite his story just because he felt empty. But deep down he knew he wasn't choosing honor. He was choosing fear. And somewhere, in a modest apartment across town, Livia sat on her tiny balcony, one hand resting on her swelling belly, staring at the same rain, wondering why his last message had gone unanswered. The storm outside mirrored the one building silently inside them both, but neither knew yet how far the lightning would travel before it struck. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Me conti sobrio tópico tu com dialogo como seu fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita emoco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters quen 3, max 11:06 a.m. The city breathed in the golden haze of early autumn, its streets alive with the rhythm of hurried footsteps and distant sirens. In a small, sunlit office on the 3rd floor of a modest downtown building, Livia adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and smoothed her blouse. Simple, clean, carefully chosen. Today was her first day as a temporary events coordinator for Morrow Holdings, and though the contract was only for 6 weeks, she'd rehearsed her introduction a dozen times in the mirror that morning. She wasn't naive. She knew this job, this chance, was her lifeline. Rent was due. Her mother's medical bills hadn't stopped piling up. And dreams, however bright, didn't pay for groceries. Livia Mendez? A sharp voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see a woman in a tailored navy suit, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning her as if weighing her worth in seconds. "Yes, I'm here for the corporate retreat coordination. Follow me." The woman didn't smile. Mr. Moreau's team doesn't tolerate delays. Livia's pulse quickened, but she nodded and followed, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She kept her shoulders back, chin level. Not out of arrogance, but necessity. In a world that often dismissed women like her, young, without connections, without a famous last name, dignity was the only armor she owned. The conference room overlooked the river, glass walls framing the city like a painting. And there, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, was Daniel Moreau. He turned as they entered, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. His were the color of storm-washed slate, intense, guarded. Hers held no agenda, only quiet resolve. "This is Livia," the woman said flatly. "She'll handle logistics for the Aspen retreat." Daniel gave a small nod. "Welcome." His voice was calm, measured, but something flickered in his gaze. Surprise? Curiosity? Livia couldn't tell. She offered a professional smile. "Thank you, Mr. Moreau. I've reviewed the guest list, venue contracts, and transportation schedules. If it's all right, I'd like to confirm dietary restrictions directly with your executive assistant this afternoon." He blinked, as if amused to someone speaking with such clarity, and without trembling under his presence. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You've already done your homework. I believe preparation is respect," she said simply. The room fell quiet. The other staff exchanged glances. No one spoke to Daniel Moreau like that. Not without layers of flattery, not without hesitation. Later, as she unpacked her notebook at a small desk assigned to her, he stopped by her station. "You're not from the usual agency," he said, leaning slightly against the partition. "Why'd they send you?" Livia didn't look up immediately. She finished writing a note, confirm allergy protocols for Executive VP, before meeting his eyes. "Because the usual agency doubled their rates last month. Your finance team went with the smaller firm that actually listens to clients." She paused. "And maybe because I asked for this assignment specifically." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She hesitated just a breath. Then, with quiet honesty, "Because I've read about your foundation's literacy program. My little brother learned to read through one of your partner libraries. So, thank you." The words hung in the air, unadorned and real. For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen, not as a billionaire, not as a brand, but as a man who'd once signed a check that mattered to someone's child. He studied her, the earnestness in her voice, the faint smudge of exhaustion beneath her eyes, the way her fingers trembled just slightly as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was just present. "Tell me," he said softly, "what's your dream, Livia Mendez? Not your job. Your dream." She looked startled, then vulnerable, like he'd reached past her armor by accident. After a long silence, she whispered, "To own a quiet place by the sea, a little bookstore with big windows, where people can sit with a cup of tea and remember they're not alone." Daniel didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it as naive. He simply said, "That sounds like heaven," and in that moment, something fragile and unspoken began to bloom between them. Not passion, not yet, but the quiet recognition of two souls tired of pretending. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent. But inside that room, for the first time in a long time, Livia allowed herself to hope. She didn't know it yet, but that hope would carry her through storms she couldn't imagine, through lonely nights, through fear, through the weight of a secret growing inside her. But for now, in the golden afternoon light, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could begin with a simple question and an honest answer. It started with glances, not the kind exchanged between employer and contractor, but the kind that linger quietly in the space between words, lingering a half-second too long, carrying warmth where none was expected. Daniel found reasons to be near her. A question about room assignments, a comment on the lighting in the main hall, even a walk to check the backup generator, just in case. Each time, Their conversations stretched beyond necessity. One evening, after most guests had retired, Livia stayed behind to finalize the next day's schedule. The fireplace in the lodge's great room crackled softly, casting long shadows across the stone floor. She sat curled in an armchair, notebook open, pen hovering over a line she couldn't seem to finish. "You're still here," Daniel said from the doorway. She looked up, surprised. "I lost track of time." He stepped inside, holding 2 mugs. Chamomile. The kitchen was still open. She accepted the mug, fingers brushing his for just an instant, enough to send a quiet current through them both. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the flames. "You never talk about yourself," he said finally. "I'm not the story here," she replied with a small smile. "You are. But you should be," he said, voice lower now. "People like you, quiet, capable, kind. They're the ones who actually hold the world together. And no one sees it." Livia looked down into her tea. "Maybe I don't need to be seen, just understood." He turned to face her fully. "Then let me understand you." And so, slowly, she did. She told him about her mother's illness, about working 3 jobs through college, about how she'd sold her grandmother's locket to pay for her brother's school books. She spoke without self-pity, but with a raw honesty that made his chest ache. Daniel listened, really listened, not as a CEO, not as a man used to solving problems with money, but as someone who suddenly saw how hollow his own victories had been. "I envy you," he admitted, voice rough. She laughed softly, surprised. "You? Envy me?" "Yes," he said, leaning forward. "You know who you are. I haven't been sure in years." The fire popped. The wind whispered through the trees outside. And then, without planning, without pretense, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined like 2 lost pieces finally finding their place. No grand declaration, no dramatic confession. Just a quiet understanding that, in this moment, they weren't alone anymore. Days turned into nights filled with shared walks under star-strewn skies, hushed conversations on porches wrapped in wool blankets, and laughter that felt like absolution. He began canceling calls. She stayed later than she should. Neither acknowledged the line they were crossing, until one snowy afternoon, it vanished entirely. They stood in the empty conference room, reviewing final invoices, when he turned and said, "I haven't felt this alive in 10 years. She looked up, eyes wide. "Daniel?" "I know," he whispered. "I know what this is, and I know what it isn't. But for once, I don't want to be the man who does the right thing. I want to be the man who feels something real." Her breath caught. She wanted to say no, to walk away, but the truth was, she'd already fallen. Not for his money, not for his name, but for the way he looked at her like she was worth remembering. That night, in the quiet hush of a mountain cabin borrowed for logistics, they crossed the threshold into something tender and irreversible. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Livia traced the line of his jaw and whispered, "This can't last, can it?" He kissed her forehead, voice thick. "I don't know, but I don't want to let go yet." She closed her eyes, holding on as if the world outside might shatter them apart the moment they stepped back into it. And it would, because 3 days later, a call came from Clara. Her voice, calm but urgent. "Daniel, your father's in the hospital. Come home." He left before dawn, promising to return in a week. "Wait for me," he said, pressing a kiss to her lips like a vow. Livia watched his car disappear down the snowy road, her hand resting on her stomach, where, just that morning, a pregnancy test had shown 2 faint lines. She didn't tell him, not yet. She wanted to be sure. She wanted to tell him in person, with his hands holding hers, with the mountains as witness. But as the days passed, his calls grew shorter, his texts colder, then silence. Until one evening, a single email appeared in her inbox, not from him, but from his legal team. "Per Mr. Morrow's request, your contract has been terminated effective immediately. Final payment will be processed." No explanation, no goodbye, just absence. Livia stood in her small apartment in the city weeks later, rain streaking the windows, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching the crumpled tissue she'd used to wipe away tears that refused to stop. She whispered to the quiet room, to the life growing inside her. He didn't even say my name. And somewhere across town, Daniel sat in a dimly lit study, staring at a photo of Clara on their wedding day, telling himself he'd done the right thing. She pressed a palm to her stomach, barely swollen, already sacred. "I'm keeping you," she whispered, voice breaking. No matter what. But doubt coiled in her chest like smoke. She hadn't heard from Daniel in weeks. Not since the retreat. Not since that last morning when he'd kissed her forehead and promised, "Wait for me." Now silence. And worse. That sterile email from his office, cutting her loose like she'd been a clerical error. She picked up her phone, typed his name, deleted it, typed it again. Before she could send anything, it rang. Her breath caught. Daniel. But it wasn't him. Livia. Clara's voice. Polished, calm, yet carrying an undercurrent Livia couldn't place. "It's Clara Moreau." Livia's blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Moreau, I'm not calling about work," Clara interrupted gently. "Daniel mentioned you helped with the Aspen event. He spoke highly of you." Livia's throat tightened. "He spoke of me? But not to me. Never to me. I'm glad I could assist," she managed. A pause. Then softer. "He's been distant lately, distracted. I thought maybe you'd know why." The question hung, a trap wrapped in silk. Livia's fingers dug into the sheets. She could lie, say nothing, but the baby stirred inside her. A tiny flutter, as if reminding her, truth matters. "I don't know what's on his mind, Mrs. Moreau," she said carefully. "But he left Aspen in a hurry. Maybe he's carrying something heavy." Clara was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe we all are." Then, just before hanging up, she added almost to herself, "He came back a different man. Or maybe he finally remembered who he used to be." The call ended. Livia sat in the silence, tears spilling freely now. She wanted to scream, to call Daniel and demand answers. But something in Clara's voice, fragile, human, stopped her. She wouldn't be the woman who shattered another woman's marriage. Not like this. Not ever. Days passed. Then a week. Livia buried herself in work. Any work. She took shifts at a bookstore, cleaned offices at night, anything to keep rent paid and her mind from spiraling. But every morning, she placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "We're okay. We're enough." Then, one rainy Tuesday, a black town car pulled up outside her building. Her heart stopped. Daniel stepped out, coat collar turned up, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked haunted. She stood frozen in her doorway as he climbed the stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat. "Livia," he said when he reached her, voice raw. She didn't invite him in. "Why are you here?" He swallowed hard. "I got your messages. I should have answered. I'm sorry. You disappeared," she said, voice trembling but steady. "After everything you said, you just vanished. I panicked," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Clara and we'd been on the verge of divorce for years. But when my father got sick, she stood by me, held everything together. And I felt like I owed her a chance. Like maybe I could fix what I'd broken." "So you fixed it by erasing me?" she asked, eyes blazing with quiet fury. "No," he said, stepping closer. "I fixed it by lying to her, to you, to myself. I thought if I walked away from you, I could go back to being the man I was supposed to be." "And are you?" she whispered. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw the subtle curve beneath her sweater, the way her hand kept drifting protectively to her side. His breath hitched. "Livia, are you?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. His face paled. "Oh God." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said. "Don't touch me like you care now. Not when you've already chosen." "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking. "If I'd known..." "What?" She cut him off, tears welling. "You'd have done what? Left her? Ruined your name? Paid me off and walked away clean? Tell me..." Daniel, What would you have done that wouldn't have hurt someone? He had no answer. Rain began to fall harder outside, drumming against the roof like judgment. I won't be your secret, Livia said, voice firm now. And I won't let my child grow up wondering if their father only stayed out of guilt. He stared at her, heart breaking in real time. Let me be part of this. Please. She shook her head slowly. You lost that right when you chose silence over truth. He stood there, drenched in regret, as she closed the door between them. Not with anger, but with unbearable grace. Alone again, Livia sank to the floor, one hand on her belly, whispering through tears. It's just us now, baby, but we'll be all right. I promise. Outside, Daniel stood in the rain, staring at the closed door, knowing he'd just lost something more valuable than all his fortunes combined. And 3 floors below, unseen, a neighbor watched him leave, then picked up the phone, tightly and said, You'll never be alone again. The first months were brutal. Morning sickness doubled her over in the grocery aisle. She cried in the shower so Theo, she'd already named him, wouldn't hear. Nights were long, filled with fears whispered into the dark. Will he be healthy? Will I be enough? Will Daniel ever come back? But then came the kicks. Tiny, insistent flutters that turned into full-blown thumps against her ribs, like a little heart drumming its own rhythm of hope. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun bled into the ocean, she felt a strong nudge beneath her palm. She laughed, tears in her eyes. You're saying hello, aren't you? No answer, of course. Just another kick. And in that moment, something inside her hardened into steel. She wouldn't wait for rescue. She wouldn't beg for recognition. She would build a life so full, so bright, that even if Daniel never returned, Theo would never feel the weight of his absence. By the time Theo was born, a stormy April night, rain lashing the windows, midwife humming softly beside her, Livia was no longer the woman who trembled at a billionaire's glance. She was a mother, and mothers don't break. They bend. They endure. They rise. Years passed in quiet rhythm. Laundry on the line, lullabies hummed off key, scraped knees kissed better, bedtime stories read by lamplight. She opened the little bookstore she'd once dreamed of, The Quiet Page, its shelves lined with second-hand novels and children's picture books, its window seat always warm with afternoon sun. Theo, now 3, was all laughter and curiosity. Wide-eyed, quick to hug, with Daniel's storm-gray eyes and Livia's stubborn chin. One morning, as she tied his tiny shoes, he looked up and asked, Mama, why don't I have a daddy like Leo? Her hands stilled. She'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. But truth, she'd decided, was kinder than fiction. Your daddy didn't know how to stay, she said gently, brushing a curl from his forehead. But that doesn't mean he didn't love you. Sometimes, grown-ups get lost. Theo frowned, thoughtful. Can we help him find his way back? Her heart cracked open. I don't know, meu amor, she whispered. But we're okay, just us. He nodded, accepting it with the simple faith only children possess. Okay, then I'll be your brave boy. Later that day, a letter arrived. No return address, just crisp corporate stationery. Her breath caught. She didn't open it. Not immediately. She placed it on the counter, made Theo his favorite banana pancakes, read him The Very Hungry Caterpillar twice, and only when he was napping in the sunbeam did she finally tear the envelope open. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from a discreet law firm. On behalf of Mr. Daniel Moreau, we are authorized to provide monthly support for the child you are raising. No conditions. No contact required. Please confirm acceptance. Beneath it, a check enough to cover her mortgage for a year. She stared at it, numb. Then, slowly, she picked up the phone. This is Livia Mendez, she said, voice steady. Tell Mr. Moreau his money isn't needed. Tell him I raised my son with my own hands. And tell him, if he ever wants to know his child, he'll have to come himself. Not with checks. Not with lawyers. With his heart. She hung up before they could reply. That night, as Theo slept, she stood on the porch again, the sea sighing below. She thought of Daniel. Was he happy? Was he haunted? Did he ever look at a little boy in the street and wonder? She didn't know. But she did know this. She had built something real. Something honest. Something that didn't need his name to matter. Still, as the stars blinked awake above, she whispered into the salt-kissed air, "If you ever come, Daniel, come as a father, not a ghost." And far away, in a penthouse that still felt too empty, Daniel stared at the lawyer's report on his desk. Recipient declined all financial support, and for the first time in years, he truly understood the cost of his silence. He'd given her money, but she'd given their son something he could never buy: dignity. And somewhere in his chest, something long buried began to stir. Remorse, yes, but also the faint, terrifying glimmer of hope. Her chest like ivy, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. Now, at 38, she felt the weight of a life polished to perfection but hollow at its core. She chaired galas, signed checks, smiled for cameras. But when she came home to their echoing penthouse, she often found herself staring at the spare nursery they'd never used, wondering what it would have felt like to rock a child to sleep. "I'd like to propose something new," she said suddenly, cutting through the murmurs of her board. All eyes turned to her. She straightened her spine. "We've funded shelters, literacy programs, maternal clinics, but we've never truly walked beside the women we claim to help. I want to launch a mentorship initiative, Minds and Mothers, pairing professional women with single mothers striving to rebuild their lives. Not just financial aid, guidance, networks, dignity." One board member raised an eyebrow. "Ambitious, risky. Some of these women come from complicated backgrounds." Clara met his gaze evenly. "So did I once." A beat of silence, then nods of agreement. Within weeks, the program took shape. Flyers went up in community centers, libraries, even laundromats. Applications poured in. Handwritten, tear-stained, hopeful. One stood out. "My name is Livia Mendez. I'm a single mother and owner of a small bookstore in Seaview Cove. I've raised my son alone since birth. I don't need money. I need a chance to show him that hard work matters. And maybe, to show myself I'm more than what people assume." Clara read those words 3 times. That name, Livia Mendez, sent a shiver through her. Coincidence? Maybe. But something deeper stirred. A pull she couldn't explain. She approved the application personally, assigned herself as the lead mentor. Weeks later, she found herself driving down coastal roads, the ocean glinting beside her, nerves fluttering like birds in her chest. She didn't know what she expected to find. A struggling woman? A bitter rival? A ghost from a past she never knew existed? She parked outside the quiet page, a charming little shop with blue shutters and a chalkboard sign that read, "Stories Heal. Come in." The bell jingled as she stepped inside. And there she was, Livia, older, stronger, hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing a faded apron, kneeling beside a boy who couldn't have been more than 3, helping him stack picture books. The boy looked up and Clara's breath caught. Those eyes, that jawline, Daniel's eyes. Her world tilted. But Livia stood smoothly, brushing off her knees, offering a warm, professional smile. "You must be Mrs. Moreau. Welcome." Clara forced her voice steady. "Please call me Clara." Theo tugged Livia's sleeve. "Mama, is this the nice lady from the paper?" "Yes, meu amor," Livia said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This is Clara. She's starting a wonderful program for moms like us." Like us. The words landed like stones in Clara's stomach. She crouched to Theo's level, heart pounding. "You must be Theo." He grinned, missing a front tooth. "I'm 3, and I read all the bear books." Clara laughed. Real, surprised laughter. "Then you're already ahead of most adults." As Livia made tea in the back room, Clara watched Theo trace letters in a notebook, humming to himself. He was bright, kind, full of light, and he was Daniel's son. She knew it in her bones. But Livia said nothing. No hints, no accusations, just quiet grace. When they sat at the small table by the window, steam curling from their mugs, Clara finally asked, voice soft, How long have you been on your own? Livia looked out at the sea. Since before he was born. And does he know his father? A pause. Then carefully. He knows his father made a choice. One day, I'll tell him the whole truth. But not until he's strong enough to carry it without it breaking him. Clara's eyes stung. You're protecting him. I'm protecting us both, Livia said, meeting her gaze. Some truths are weapons. I won't let mine hurt him. Clara reached across the table, not sure why, but her hand found Livia's. You're remarkable. Livia's eyes shimmered, but she didn't pull away. I'm just a mother who loves her son. And in that moment, Clara made a silent vow. She would not be the woman who destroyed this fragile peace. Not out of pride, not out of fear. But as she drove back to the city, Theo's face burning in her memory, one terrifying thought echoed. Daniel has a son, and he doesn't even know it. Worse, she might be the one who has to tell him. That night, she stood in their penthouse, Daniel scrolling through emails, distant as ever. Daniel, she said softly, what would you do if you found out you'd missed something irreplaceable? He looked up, frowning. What do you mean? She almost said it, almost let the truth spill out, but she stopped herself. Because some revelations need the right stage. And the Foundation's gala, the biggest event of the year, was only 3 weeks away. A place where worlds collide. A place where secrets surface. A place where a billionaire might look across a crowded room and see his son. You're cordially invited to the annual Hearts and Hope Gala. In recognition of your participation in the Minds and Mothers Initiative, her breath caught. She'd known this moment might come. Clara had mentioned the gala weeks ago, during their last mentorship meeting, how Livia's story had moved the selection committee, how they'd want her to attend, perhaps even speak briefly about resilience. But now that it was real, dread coiled in her stomach like cold wire, because the gala wasn't just any event. It was his world, and Daniel would be there. She looked at Theo, his tongue poking out in concentration as he drew a blue sun over a green ocean. Mama, what's that? A party, she said softly, for people who help others. Can I go? He asked, eyes wide. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. Too risky, too soon, too much. But then Clara's words echoed in her mind. Your presence matters. Not for them, for every mother who's ever been made to feel invisible. And wasn't that why she'd said yes to the program? Not for charity, but for truth. She knelt beside him. Only if you promise to be my brave boy. He nodded solemnly. I promise. The night of the gala. The city glittered like shattered glass beneath a velvet sky. Livia stood outside the Grand Hotel entrance in a simple navy dress. Second hand, carefully pressed. Her hair swept back. Theo in a tiny suit, gripping her hand like a lifeline. You look beautiful, Mama, he whispered. She kissed his temple. So do you, meu coração. Inside, crystal chandeliers blazed, champagne flutes clinked, and the air hummed with money and murmured pleasantries. Livia kept to the edges, guiding Theo toward the quiet corner Clara had arranged for honored guests. A small seating area near the silent auction tables, away from the main stage. Livia! Clara appeared, radiant in emerald silk, her smile warm but her eyes sharp with unspoken tension. She knelt to Theo's level. You made it. I told you I would, Livia said, her voice steady, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Clara touched her arm briefly, reassurance, warning. She wasn't sure which. Stay here a moment. I'll be right back with your name tag and Theo's activity kit. As Clara walked away, Livia adjusted Theo's tie, forcing calm into her voice. Remember what we practiced? If anyone asks, you say, my name is Theo, and I help my mama at the bookstore. Yes, Mama. She turned to check the layout of the ballroom and froze. Across the room, near the grand staircase, Daniel stood in a tailored tuxedo, accepting a glass of champagne from a server. He looked older, more severe. And yet, in the way he tilted his head, listening to a donor, she saw the man who'd once whispered dreams to her under mountain stars. Her breath stopped, and then, as if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met. Time snapped. He went utterly still. The glass in his hand tilted. Champagne spilled over his fingers, unnoticed. Because there, beside Livia, small, bright-eyed, clutching a stuffed bear Clara had given him, stood a boy who was his mirror. The same slope of the brow, the same curve of the lips, the same quiet intensity in his stare. Daniel's face drained of color. Livia didn't look away. She didn't run. She simply placed a protective hand on Theo's shoulder and held Daniel's gaze. Calm, unflinching, full of years of silence. Theo tugged her sleeve. "Mama, who is that man?" Her throat tightened. "No one, meu amor. Just someone from a long time ago." But across the room, Daniel had already taken a step forward, then stopped himself, jaw clenched, eyes burning with shock, guilt, and something rawer: recognition. Clara returned just then, name tags in hand. She saw Daniel's expression, saw where he was looking. Her breath hitched. She glanced between Livia and Daniel, then knelt quickly beside Theo, her voice low but urgent. "Livia, maybe we should." But it was too late. Daniel was walking toward them, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, trembling certainty of a man walking toward a truth he can no longer outrun. Livia's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free. She tightened her grip on Theo's hand, because in that moment, the carefully built walls of 3 years, of silence, survival, and sacrifice, stood trembling on the edge of collapse. And the only thing standing between her and the storm was a 3-year-old boy who didn't yet know he held a billionaire's name in his blood. Daniel stopped a few feet away. He didn't speak. He just looked at Theo, really looked, and whispered, voice breaking, "Hello." Theo blinked up at him, curious, unafraid. "Hi, I'm Theo." Daniel's eyes filled with tears he didn't wipe away. "Why don't you go with Mrs. Moreau for a moment? She has your coloring book." Clara, pale but composed, held out her hand. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's find the best crayons." Theo hesitated, then took her hand, glancing once more at the stranger with eyes that looked eerily like his own. As they walked away, the space between Livia and Daniel seemed to shrink, charged with everything left unsaid. "You never told me," he finally whispered, voice ragged. "I tried," she replied, voice low but steady. "You deleted my messages. You sent lawyers with checks. You chose silence, Daniel. Not me." He flinched as if struck. "If I'd known, you would have what?" She cut in, eyes blazing with quiet fire. "Married me? Left Clara? Or just paid me to disappear neatly, like a problem to be managed?" He had no answer, because deep down he didn't know. He looked past her, toward where Theo sat cross-legged on a velvet bench, laughing as Clara showed him how to color inside the lines. The sight undid him. "He's mine," Daniel said, not as a question, but as a revelation tearing through his chest. "Yes," Livia said, "he's yours, and he's mine. And for 3 years, he's been enough for me." Daniel's voice cracked. "I missed everything." "You did," she said, not cruelly, but with a sorrow so deep it echoed. His first steps, his first word, "Mama." The night he had a fever and cried for hours, I sang to him until dawn. You weren't there. He closed his eyes, shame washing over him like a wave. "I didn't know how to face you. I thought, if I stayed away, I'd protect you both from the mess I'd made." "Protection isn't absence," she said softly. "It's presence, even when it's hard." Across the ballroom, soft piano music began to play. Guests mingled, unaware that a life was being rewritten in the quiet space between two people who once loved and lost each other. Daniel took a step closer, desperation in his eyes. "Let me know him, not as a billionaire, not as some obligation, just as his father." Livia searched his face. She saw the pain, the regret, but also something new: fear, real fear, not of scandal, not of loss of control, but of being unworthy. She remembered the man in Aspen who'd asked about her dreams, the man who'd held her like she mattered. Was he still there? Before she could answer, Clara returned, Theo trailing behind her, clutching a drawing. "Look, Mama!" Theo ran to her, holding up a page filled with bright scribbles. "It's us, and the sea, and the bookstore, and—" He pointed to a tall stick figure beside Livia. "This is the nice man who said hello." Livia's breath caught. Daniel knelt slowly, his expensive tuxedo brushing the marble floor. "Can I see it?" Theo handed him the drawing without hesitation. Daniel traced the stick figure with trembling fingers. "You drew me in your family?" Theo nodded. "You have nice eyes, like mine." Daniel's composure shattered. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Clara watched them, this fractured family forming in real time, and her heart ached with a strange mix of grief and grace. She turned to Livia, voice barely above a whisper. "He deserves a chance. Not for Daniel. For Theo." Livia looked at her, really looked, and saw no jealousy, no anger, only sorrow and understanding. Because Clara, too, had lived in a beautiful cage of silence. Daniel stood, still holding the drawing. "I won't ask for forgiveness," he said, voice thick, "but I'm asking for time, to earn his trust, to earn yours." Livia glanced at Theo, who was now curiously patting Daniel's tuxedo lapel, as if testing whether he was real. She took a slow breath. "Not here," she said. "Not tonight, but next Saturday. The bookstore, 10 a.m. You come alone. You bring nothing but yourself. And if he likes you, you can come back." Daniel nodded, tears still wet on his face. "I'll be there." As the gala swirled on around them, champagne, laughter, philanthropy masquerading as intimacy. Three souls stood in a fragile triangle of hope, pain, silence in Daniel's eyes, the quiet strength in Livia's voice, the innocent trust in Theo's outstretched hand. She watched as Livia gently guided Theo toward the exit, the boy yawning against her shoulder, his small fingers still clutching the drawing he'd made. Daniel stood rooted in place, staring at the paper in his own hands as if it were a sacred text. Clara approached him slowly. "You should go after them," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "She gave me a chance, a real one, not because of money, not because of guilt, because of him." His voice cracked on the last word. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "Do you love him?" Daniel finally turned to her, eyes raw. "I didn't even know he existed until 10 minutes ago. But yes, already. Like my soul recognized him before my mind did." She nodded, her own eyes glistening. "Then don't make the same mistake twice." He searched her face. "Clara, I'm so sorry. For everything." She offered a sad, knowing smile. "You didn't betray me with Livia, Daniel. You betrayed yourself. And maybe us. But that doesn't mean we can't find our way back to honesty, if not to each other." Before he could respond, she turned and walked toward Livia, catching up just as they reached the grand foyer. "Livia," she called gently. Livia paused, shifting Theo's weight in her arms. "Clara, I meant what I said earlier," Clara said, stepping closer, her voice warm but earnest. "Your courage moved me, not just as a mentor but as a woman. You built a life from nothing but love and willpower. That's extraordinary." Livia's eyes softened. "I just did what any mother would do." "No," Clara said firmly. "Not any mother. You did, and that matters." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded brochure. "The foundation is launching a literacy corner in 5 new community centers. We want your bookstore to curate the children's sections. And we'd like you to lead monthly storytelling sessions." Livia blinked, surprised. "But after tonight?" "Because of tonight," Clara said, her gaze steady. "The world thinks strength looks like power suits and stock portfolios. But real strength? It looks like you, standing tall after being broken, raising a child with grace, refusing to trade your dignity for comfort." Tears welled in Livia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Because I see what you've given him, and I realize I want to be part of something real too. Theo stirred in Livia's arms, blinking sleepily. Mama, is Mrs. Clara nice? Livia looked at Clara, really looked and saw no threat. Only a woman tired of pretense, reaching across a divide not of her making. Yes, meu amor, she said softly. She's very nice. Clara smiled and brushed a gentle hand over Theo's hair. I'd love to come visit you both. At the bookstore, if that's all right. Livia nodded. You're always welcome. As they stepped out into the cool night, a sleek town car idling nearby, Clara watched them go. Mother and son silhouetted against the city lights. She felt a strange peace settle over her, mingled with grief, but also clarity. Back inside, Daniel stood alone by the window, still holding Theo's drawing. He traced the stick figure labeled Daddy with his thumb, his chest tight with a new kind of fear. Not of losing everything, but of finally being seen. Clara joined him, silent for a moment. He called him Daddy on that drawing, she said softly. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if the word alone could break him. He doesn't even know me. But he wanted to, she said. That's where it starts. He turned to her, voice barely a whisper. What happens now? Clara looked toward the door where Livia and Theo had disappeared into the night. Now, you become the man your son already believes you are. And as the gala's final notes faded into the velvet dark, 3 lives, once fractured by silence, pride, and fear, began to move toward a truth too powerful to ignore. But outside the hotel, in the shadows beyond the valet stand, a man in a dark coat snapped a photo of Livia and Theo climbing into a cab, then sent it with a single line. Confirmed. Moreau has a son. The screen glowed for a moment, then went dark. He kept replaying it the way Theo had looked at him, not with fear, not with confusion, but with curiosity, as if he'd been waiting. And Livia, she hadn't flinched, hadn't screamed, hadn't used his son as a weapon. She'd offered him a chance. Measured, cautious, but real. That was worse than hatred, because it demanded something from him to be better. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed. Clara. I couldn't sleep either. Meet me at the foundation office. There's something we need to discuss. He arrived to find her already there, the room lit only by a single lamp. She stood by the window, arms crossed, tension coiled in her shoulders. He's your son, Daniel, she said without turning. Biologically, emotionally, you saw it. Everyone who knows you will see it. I know, he whispered. Then you also know this won't stay quiet, she said, finally facing him. Her eyes were tired, but clear. The press will find out. The board will ask questions. Your father's legacy, your entire empire, relies on perception. And perception just cracked. He ran a hand over his face. I don't care about the board. You should, she snapped, sharper than she intended, then softer. Because if they turn on you, they'll turn on him. They'll dig into Livia's past. They'll paint her as a gold digger. They'll make Theo a spectacle. Daniel's blood ran cold. I won't let that happen. How? Clara stepped closer. By hiding him? By giving him money in secret? That's what you did before. And look where it got you. He had no answer. She sighed, her voice breaking slightly. I spent my whole marriage believing I was enough. Elegant. Capable. Present. But you were never there. Not really. And now, I see why. He looked at her, stricken. Clara, I never... No, she cut in gently. You didn't betray me with your body. You betrayed me with your absence. Just like you did with her. A heavy silence settled between them. I'm not angry, she said after a long moment. I'm sad. For all of us. But especially for him. She nodded toward the drawing on his desk. That little boy deserves more than secrets. Daniel's voice was rough. What do you want me to do? I want you to choose, she said. Not just acknowledge him. Claim him. Publicly. Fully. Even if it costs you everything. He stared at her, stunned. You'd be okay with that? After everything? Clara gave a sad, small smile. I don't get to decide who your son is, Daniel. But I get to decide what kind of woman I am. And I refuse to be the wife who lets a child suffer for the sake of a perfect image. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't deserve you. No, she said softly. You don't. But maybe you can deserve him. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the future pressing down on them. Later, as dawn painted the sky in pale gold, Daniel stood on his balcony, phone in hand. He opened a new message. Livia, I'll be there Saturday, 10 a.m. I won't bring flowers or excuses, just me. And if he'll let me, I'd like to read him a story. He hit send. Then, for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer. Not for success, not for control, but for grace. Because out there, in a little bookstore by the sea, a 3-year-old boy was sleeping with a stuffed bear under his arm and a drawing of his father tucked beneath his pillow. And Daniel knew this wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about showing up. But even as hope flickered in his chest, a cold unease settled in his gut. Because earlier that night, as he left the gala, he'd seen a man in a dark coat near the valet stand, watching, not mingling, not celebrating, just watching Livia and Theo. He'd dismissed it as paranoia. Now he wasn't so sure. Somewhere, someone was already writing a different ending. One where truth wasn't honored, but exploited. And Daniel had no idea how to protect them from it. Not yet, but he would learn. He'd looked at Theo like he was seeing a miracle, and that terrified her more than anger ever could. Because hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe things could be fixed. Hope made you lower your guard. And Livia had spent 3 years building walls not out of spite, but survival. Now, with one glance, one trembling hello, those walls had cracked. Back in their small apartment above the bookstore, she tucked Theo into bed, smoothing his hair as he mumbled, "The nice man has my eyes, mama?" She kissed his forehead. "Go to sleep, meu amor." Once he was breathing deeply, she walked to the window and stared into the night. Her hands trembled. She pulled out her phone, opened the message thread from Daniel, empty for years, then saw it. A new message, sent just minutes ago. Livia, I'll be there Saturday, 10 a.m. I won't bring flowers or excuses, just me. And if he'll let me, I'd like to read him a story. She read it 3 times. Part of her wanted to delete it, to cancel, to pack a bag and disappear again. But then she thought of Theo's drawing, the stick figure labeled Daddy, standing beside them under a smiling sun. Her son hadn't asked for a billionaire. He'd asked for a father. And maybe, just maybe, Daniel wanted to be one. Still, fear coiled in her gut like cold smoke, because she remembered the last time she'd trusted him. The silence, the legal letter, the way he'd chosen his world over her. She turned from the window and walked to the closet, pulling out a small box from the back shelf. Inside lay a single photo taken in Aspen before everything fell apart. Daniel smiling, relaxed, his arm around her waist as they stood on a wooden deck, mountains behind them. She'd kept it not out of longing, but as a reminder. Even the sweetest moments can be lies if they're not built on truth. She closed the box. The next morning, she opened the bookstore early, rearranging shelves with nervous energy. Theo played quietly with wooden blocks, humming to himself. "Mama," he said suddenly, "will the nice man come back?" She paused, dust rag in hand. "He said he would. Will he read the grumpy bear?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But if he does, you can decide if you like him." Theo nodded seriously. "Okay, I'll be brave." Later that afternoon, as she swept the front step, a sleek black car slowed at the curb. Her heart leapt into her throat. But it wasn't Daniel. A man in a dark coat stepped out, holding a notepad. "Livia Mendez?" She instinctively stepped back. "Who's asking?" "I'm with Cityscope magazine," he said, flashing a badge that looked real enough. "We're doing a feature on grassroots literacy heroes. You were recommended by the Moreau Foundation." She relaxed slightly but not completely. "I'm flattered, but I don't do interviews." He smiled too wide. "Just a few photos. Your son's adorable, by the way. Those eyes, real standout. Something in his tone set off alarms. She shut the door in his face without another word. Heart pounding, she locked it, then checked the blinds. The man lingered, snapping a photo of the storefront before getting back in his car. She grabbed her phone and dialed Clara. Clara, someone just came, posing as a journalist. He knew about Theo. He knew. Clara's voice turned sharp. Did you give him anything? No, but I think someone's watching us. A pause. Then, quietly, Daniel saw someone too, last night, at the gala. Livia's blood ran cold. He's coming Saturday, she whispered. What if they follow him here? What if this becomes a circus? Clara exhaled slowly. Then we protect them. Both of them. You focus on Theo. I'll handle the press. And Daniel, he'll have to decide what kind of man he really is. After hanging up, Livia sat on the floor beside Theo, pulling him into her lap. Mama? He asked, sensing her tension. I'm just thinking, she said, pressing her lips to his hair, about how much I love you. He hugged her tight. I love you more. She closed her eyes, holding him like he was the only real thing in a world about to spin out of control. Because she knew now, this wasn't just about a second chance. It was about shielding her son from a world that saw children like him as Uxtor 3 times, placing Theo's favorite books within easy reach, setting out 2 small chairs side by side, and tucking a fresh blanket over the reading nook. She told herself it was for Theo, but her hands trembled as she smoothed the blanket, and her reflection in the shop window looked pale, braced. At 9:45 a.m., a taxi pulled up, not the sleek town car she half expected, but an ordinary yellow cab. Daniel stepped out in simple dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, no watch, no cufflinks, just a man. And in his hands, not a gift bag, but a single worn copy of The Giving Tree. He stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the blue door, as if afraid to cross the threshold into a life he'd ignored for years. Inside, Theo peeked through the lace curtain. Mama, he's here. Livia took a deep breath. Remember what we said? I be brave, and I decide. She opened the door. Daniel's eyes went straight to Theo, who stood half-hidden behind her leg, clutching his bear. Hi, Daniel said, voice barely above a whisper. Hi, Theo echoed, curiosity winning over shyness. Daniel crouched slowly, keeping his distance. I brought a story, if you'd like to hear it. Theo glanced up at Livia. She gave the tiniest nod. He stepped forward. What followed wasn't grand. No declarations, no tears, just a man, reading aloud in a soft, careful voice, pausing when Theo pointed at a picture and asked, Why the tree sad, Papa? The word slipped out so naturally, Papa, that Livia's breath caught. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, eyes shining, but didn't correct him. Just turned the page gently and said, Because she loved him very much. After the story, Theo showed him the bookstore. This is where Mama fixes broken spines, he said, patting a stack of novels. Daniel listened to every word, asked questions, laughed at Theo's jokes. And slowly, miraculously, Theo began to relax, climbing onto Daniel's lap during the second story, leaning against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Livia watched from behind the counter, heart aching with something too complex to name. Later, as Theo napped in the back room, Daniel stood by the window, watching the waves. I didn't know how much I missed, he said quietly. Not just him, the ordinary things, the quiet. Livia folded a stack of flyers, not looking at him. Ordinary is all we've ever had, but it's enough. He turned to her. Let me be part of it. Not just visits, real life, school pickups, bedtime stories, scraped knees. She met his gaze. People are watching, Daniel. That journalist yesterday? He wasn't press. Someone knows. And they're waiting to see what you'll do. He stepped closer, voice fierce. Then let them see me do the right thing. Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed. Clara stood there, elegant in a simple linen dress, holding a tote bag. I hope I'm not interrupting. Livia blinked. Clara? What are you? I came to see my mentee, Clara said, smiling warmly as she walked in. Then to Daniel, and my husband. The word husband hung in the air, complicated, tender. But then Clara knelt beside Theo's sleeping form and brushed a hand over his hair. He's even more beautiful up close. Daniel's voice was rough. You're not angry. I'm heartbroken, she admitted. But not at you. At the years we wasted pretending. She looked at Livia. I've been thinking, the Foundation's literacy program needs a community ambassador. Someone authentic. Someone who's lived the struggle and still chooses hope. She held out a folder. I'd like it to be you. Livia stared at the papers. Why? Because Theo deserves to see his mother celebrated. Not hidden, Clara said softly. And because I finally understand, love isn't a finite resource. There's enough for all of us, if we're brave enough to share it honestly. Daniel looked between the two women, his past, his present, and the fragile future sleeping in the next room. Outside, a car idled too long down the street. A man stepped out, camera in hand. Clara saw him too. Without panic, she walked to the door and locked it, pulling the open sign around to closed. We'll face them together, she said, turning back to them, her voice steady. But today belongs to him. And in that quiet bookstore, with the sea sighing beyond the walls and a child breathing softly in the next room, 3 adults made a silent pact. Not to hide, not to fight, but to protect the one heart that mattered most. Because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when the world is watching, even when you're scared. But beneath the quiet joy, a storm was gathering. Photos had begun circulating online. Grainy but unmistakable. Daniel crouched beside a little boy outside a blue-shuttered shop, the boy tugging at his sleeve, the billionaire's face unguarded, tender. Tabloids buzzed with speculation. Moreau's secret son? Mistress or muse? Wife stands by. But for how long? Board members called. Lawyers emailed. His father's old partners sent terse messages. This threatens the brand. But Daniel didn't care. Not the way he once would have. What kept him awake at night wasn't reputation. It was doubt. Was he enough? One rainy afternoon, he sat alone in his study, staring at a file Clara had discreetly compiled. A quiet investigation, not out of malice, but protection. Bank statements showed Livia had never cashed the support checks. Employment records confirmed she'd worked 2 jobs while pregnant. And interviews with neighbors in Seaview Cove painted a consistent picture. A woman who never complained, never asked for help, never mentioned Daniel's name. Not even when her car broke down or when Theo had chickenpox. She'd raised his son with nothing but her 2 hands and unwavering love. And she'd never tried to sell that story. He picked up the phone and called his private investigator. The same man who'd once tracked her down for him years ago. At his request, only to report back, "She's clean, sir. No debts to collectors, no secret lovers, no agenda. Just a mother. Find out who's leaking the photos," Daniel ordered, voice steel. "And who sent that fake journalist to her door." 24 hours later, the answer came. It wasn't a rival CEO. Not a tabloid. It was his uncle, Elias Moreau, his father's younger brother. A man passed over for leadership decades ago, bitter and hungry for leverage. Elias had hired a surveillance team the moment rumors of a mystery child reached his ears. He'd been waiting for Daniel to slip, for his empire to show a crack. And now he had proof. Daniel sat in his car outside Livia's bookstore the next evening. Rain drumming on the roof, heart pounding like a trapped thing. He didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, he watched through the window as Livia helped Theo hang paper stars from the ceiling, their laughter muffled by glass. She looked tired but peaceful. Safe. His phone buzzed. A text from Elias. "Family matters should stay in the family, nephew. Or shall we let the world decide who's fit to lead Moreau Global?" Daniel's hands clenched around the steering wheel. He'd spent his life building walls to protect his power. Now, for the first time, he needed to tear them down to protect his son. He stepped out into the rain and walked to the door. Livia opened it before he could knock. "You're soaked," she said, eyes wide. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice raw. "Before someone else does." She let him in. In the back room, Theo was asleep on a small cot, a nightlight casting soft shadows. Daniel stood in the doorway, water dripping from his coat, and told her everything. Elias, the surveillance, the threat, the photos. Livia listened in silence. When he finished, she didn't cry, didn't rage. She just looked at him, her eyes old with understanding. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought the worst danger was your absence. But it's your world. It's always been your world." He stepped closer, voice breaking. "I won't let him hurt you. Or Theo." "How?" she asked, arms crossed like armor. "By paying him off? By burying us again in silence?" "No," Daniel said, meeting her gaze. "By making it impossible to bury us." He pulled out his phone, opened his camera, and walked to Theo's bedside. Gently, he touched his son's cheek just once, then turned to Livia. "Stand with me," he said, "in front of everyone. Not as a secret, not as a scandal, as his parents." She stared at him, tears welling. "You'd risk everything?" "I already lost everything once," he said softly. "When I walked away from you. I won't do it again." Outside, lightning split the sky. She was right. And the worst part? He'd known it all along. His phone buzzed. "Clara. Elias is calling an emergency board meeting Monday. He's circulating the photos. He wants you removed as CEO." Daniel didn't reply. He just stared at the concrete floor, the hum of the ventilation system echoing like a verdict. Then, on impulse, he walked back to his car, drove to the edge of the financial district, and parked near a 24-hour diner, the kind with chipped formica tables and coffee that tasted like regret. He needed air. Needed to feel human, not just a name on a stock ticker. He didn't see her at first. Livia sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, staring out the rain-streaked window. She looked exhausted, beautiful, real. Their eyes met. She didn't look away. He approached slowly, as if she might vanish. "I didn't know you'd be here. I couldn't sleep," she said, voice quiet. "Theo kept asking if the nice man would come back. And I didn't know what to tell him." Daniel slid into the booth across from her. "I should have protected you better." "You can't protect us from your family," she said, not unkindly. "Only from yourself." He flinched. A silence settled between them, filled only by the hiss of rain and the clatter of distant dishes. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not the polished kind. The real one. For leaving. For doubting you. For thinking money could fix what my silence broke." Livia looked down at her hands. "I used to dream you'd come back. Not for me, for him. But then I stopped dreaming. Because hope hurt too much." She met his eyes, and the pain in hers nearly undid him. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling with quiet strength, "your regret doesn't give me back the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was enough. It doesn't erase the fear I felt every time Theo got a fever and I had no one to call. Your remorse is yours, but it doesn't heal what you took." He swallowed hard, tears burning behind his eyes. "Then tell me what will." She leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "Be here. Not because you feel guilty. Not because the world is watching. But because you choose him. Every day. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs you everything." Outside, a car splashed through a puddle, headlights flashing across her face. "I want to," he whispered. "God, Livia, I want to." "Want isn't enough," she said softly. "Action is." A long pause. Then, gently, "Why did you really come tonight?" He looked at her, really looked, and let the truth spill out raw and unguarded. "Because I'm scared. Scared Elias will twist this into a weapon. Scared the board will turn on me. Scared I'll lose control, and in doing so, lose you both all over again." Livia reached across the table, not to touch him, but to place her hand near his. "Then stop trying to control it. Stand in the truth. Let them see you love your son. Let them see you're not the man they think you are. He covered her hand with his own, just for a second. Will you stand with me? She didn't pull away. If you stand for him, not your image, not your empire, then yes, I'll stand. As they left the diner together, rain cooling their faces, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not just responsibility, but purpose. But down the street, under a flickering street lamp, a black sedan idled. Elias's private security. Watching, waiting, because the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, Daniel wouldn't fight with money or lawyers. She didn't turn as he stepped outside. You've been with her. It wasn't a question. He stood beside her, the rain having softened to a mist that clung to his skin. I had to tell her everything. About Elias. The board. The photos. Clara finally looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. And what did she say? That I can't protect them by hiding, he said, voice rough. That the only way forward is through the fire. A bitter laugh escaped her. Funny. That's what I've been trying to tell you for years. He turned to face her fully. Clara, I never meant to hurt you. You didn't mean to do a lot of things, she said quietly. But intention doesn't erase impact. She walked to the railing, gripping it tightly. All these years I thought if I was perfect, if I hosted the right events, wore the right dresses, said the right things, you'd finally come back to me. But you were never gone because of me, Daniel. You were gone because you were running from yourself. He had no defense. She turned back, tears glistening in the dim light. Do you love her? He hesitated, not out of dishonesty, but because the truth was more complicated than romance. I don't know what I feel for Livia anymore, but I know this. I love my son. And she gave him life when I gave him nothing but silence. Clara nodded slowly, as if that answer settled something inside her. Then stop trying to manage this like a merger. This isn't about assets or optics. It's about a child who calls you Papa and believes you'll come back. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me the truth, Daniel. All of it. Not the version you think I can handle, the real one. He closed his eyes. When I saw him at the gala, it was like my soul recognized him before my mind did. And in that moment, everything I thought mattered. My name, my fortune, my control, felt like dust. He opened his eyes, tears spilling over. I have a son, Clara, and I've missed 3 years of his life because I was too afraid to face what I'd done. She reached out and touched his arm. Gently, not with longing, but with sorrow and release. I won't stand in the way of you being his father, she said, voice steady now. But I can't pretend this doesn't shatter me. I know, he whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're taken care of. No, she cut in sharply. Don't offer me money like I'm a problem to be solved. Offer me honesty. That's all I ever wanted. He nodded, humbled. Then I'll give you that. From now on. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Finally, Clara spoke again, softer now. Elias called me today. Daniel stiffened. What did he say? He said if you go public with the boy, he'll leak private medical records. Fabricated but convincing, that claim Theo isn't yours. He'll say Livia lied to trap you. He'll destroy her. Daniel's blood ran cold. He wouldn't. He already has the files drawn up, Clara said. He's waiting for you to make your move. Daniel's fists clenched. I won't let him near them. Then you have to act first, Clara said, her eyes sharp with resolve. Not with lawyers. With truth. Stand with them. Publicly, completely. Before he twists it into a lie. She took a deep breath. And Daniel, if you do this, there's no turning back. The board may oust you. The press will crucify you. Your father's legacy might never recover. He looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn touched the sky. Then let it burn, he said, voice quiet but unshakable. Because I'd rather lose everything I built than lose him again. Clara studied him for a long moment, really studied him, and for the first time in years she saw the man she'd once fallen in love with. Not the billionaire, but the boy who used to read poetry under oak trees, who believed in second chances. She squeezed his arm. Then I'll stand with you too. Not as your wife, but as a woman who finally sees you clearly. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in gold and rose, Daniel made his decision. He would not hide. He would not bargain. The bell above the door chimed. Clara stepped in alone, dressed not in gala silk, but in simple linen trousers and a soft cream sweater. No jewelry, no armor. Livia's breath caught. "Clara, I hope I'm not interrupting," Clara said, her voice quieter than usual. "You're not." Livia gestured to the small table by the window. "Coffee, please." As Livia poured 2 mugs, she felt Clara's gaze following her. Steady, searching. When she turned, their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not rivalry, not resentment, but the quiet ache of 2 women who'd loved the same man in different ways, at different times, for different reasons. They sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, a delivery van rumbled past. Theo giggled as his book tower tumbled. Finally, Clara said, "Daniel told me everything." Livia's fingers tightened around her mug. "Which version?" "The honest one," Clara replied. "The one where he admits he ran. Where he says he doesn't deserve you, or Theo. But where he also says he wants to try." Livia looked down. "Trying isn't enough if it's only when it's convenient." "I know," Clara said softly. "That's why I'm here." She reached into her bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Elias has scheduled a board vote for tomorrow. He's circulating a narrative that you're a manipulative opportunist, that Theo isn't even Daniel's." Livia's blood ran cold. "He can't prove that." "He doesn't need to," Clara said, her voice sharp with quiet fury. "Rumors are enough in our world. And if Daniel doesn't act first, they'll paint you as a liar and Theo as a pawn." Livia's eyes burned. "I kept him safe for 3 years. I won't let them turn him into a headline." "Then help us stop them," Clara said, leaning forward, voice low but urgent. "Not as Daniel's mistress, not as a victim, but as Theo's mother, the woman who raised him with dignity when no one was watching." Livia looked at her, stunned. "Why are you doing this?" Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. "Because I spent my whole marriage believing love was something you earned by being perfect. But watching you with Theo, I realized love is something you give even when you're afraid, even when you've been hurt." She took a shaky breath. "And because, if Daniel is finally ready to be a father, he shouldn't have to do it alone. And neither should you." Livia's throat tightened. "What do you want me to do?" "Stand with him," Clara said. "Publicly. At the Foundation Gala next week, the one your story inspired. Let the world see you together. Not as a scandal, as a family choosing each other." Livia looked toward Theo, who was now carefully stacking books again, his tongue poking out in concentration. "He calls Daniel Papa now," she whispered. Clara smiled faintly. "Then let him have one." Silence settled between them, but it was different now, lighter, like a weight had been shared. Then, hesitantly, Livia asked, "And you? Where do you fit in this?" Clara looked out the window toward the sea. "I don't know yet. Maybe I help rebuild something new. Maybe I walk away. But I won't be the woman who lets fear dictate love." She stood, placing a hand gently on Livia's shoulder. "You've already done the hardest part, raising him with your whole heart. Now let someone else help carry the load." As Clara turned to leave, Theo ran over, holding up a drawing. "Mrs. Clara, look, it's you and Mama and Papa and me." Clara knelt, taking the paper with trembling hands. In bright crayon, for stick figures stood under a rainbow, holding hands. She touched the figure labeled Mama, then Papa, then her own. "I'm in your family?" she asked, voice breaking. Theo nodded solemnly. "You're nice. And you help." Clara pulled him into a gentle hug, tears spilling silently onto his hair. When she stood, her eyes met Livia's. And in that look, years of pain, pride, and pretense dissolved into something raw and real. I'll see you at the gala, Clara said softly. Then she left, the bell chiming behind her like a promise. Livia picked up the drawing Theo had made, her heart pounding with fear, and Daniel came every other day, not with gifts, but with presents. He read stories, helped repair a wobbly shelf, sat on the floor as Theo taught him how to build a block castle without knocking it over. Each time he left, Livia watched him go from the window, her chest tight with something she couldn't yet name. Trust, maybe, or the fragile beginnings of forgiveness. Then, the night before the gala, he arrived unannounced, his face drawn, eyes shadowed. They moved the vote up, he said, voice low. Elias called an emergency session tonight. The board's deciding whether to strip me of operational control by morning. Livia's breath caught. Because of Theo? Because of us, he said. Because I refused to deny him. Because I told them I'd rather lose everything than hide my son. She stepped closer. What happens if they vote against you? I'll still be a shareholder, he said, forcing calm into his voice. But I won't be able to protect the foundation. Or you. Elias will dismantle everything Clara built. And he'll use the press to destroy your reputation. Outside, wind rattled the bookstore sign. Inside, Theo slept soundly in the back room, unaware that his very existence had become a battlefield. Livia looked at Daniel. Not the billionaire, not the heir, but the man who'd sat on her floor for hours just to hear his son say again, and made a decision. Then we don't wait for their vote, she said, voice steady. We go public first. He stared at her. Livia. No more shadows, she interrupted. If they want a story, we'll give them the true one, not the one Elias will spin. Ours. Before he could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Clara appeared in the doorway, coat damp from the rain, eyes blazing with quiet fire. I just left the boardroom, she said. Elias played his hand. He showed them forged DNA analysis. Claimed you were emotionally unstable, Daniel, that you'd been manipulated. Daniel's face paled. What did they say? Half believe him, Clara admitted. The other half are waiting to see what you do next. She turned to Livia. There's a press room at the gala, reserved for major announcements. I've kept it open, for you. Livia's pulse raced. You'd let us do that? On your stage. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand on each of their arms. It's not my stage. It's ours. The foundation was always meant to be about truth, about lifting voices that get silenced. And yours, she looked at Livia, has been silent long enough. Tears welled in Livia's eyes. I don't want fame. I don't want pity. I just want him to know his father. Then let the world see that, Clara said gently. Not as a scandal, as a redemption. Daniel looked between them, overwhelmed. You're both risking everything for a boy you barely know. I know enough, Clara said softly. I know he calls you Papa, and that's worth more than any boardroom. Livia reached for Daniel's hand. Just once, just for a second. But the contact sent a current through them both. Tomorrow, she said, voice firm, we walk in together, you, me, Theo, and we tell them the truth. That love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you've failed before. Daniel swallowed hard. What if they don't believe us? Then we don't need them, Livia said, because we'll have each other. Outside, the storm raged, harder, wind howling like a warning. But inside the little bookstore, something unbreakable was forming. Not a perfect family, but a real one. And as the three of them stood together in the golden lamplight, mother, father, and the woman who chose grace over ruin, the weight of the coming day felt lighter, because they were no longer alone. And tomorrow, under the glare of chandeliers and cameras, they would choose love. Not as a secret, but as a declaration. Even if the world tried to silence them. Even if it cost them everything. Clara sat across from them, elegant in midnight blue, her expression calm, though her knuckles were white around her clutch. You don't have to do this, she said softly. The board vote is already over. Elias won. You're out as CEO. Daniel didn't look at her. Then let the world know why. Livia's breath hitched. Daniel. He finally turned to her, eyes raw. I spent 3 years running from the truth because I was afraid of losing control. But I lost something far more precious. I won't make that mistake again. The car slowed. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions. Mr. Moreau, is it true? Who is the child? Will your wife file for divorce? Theo pressed closer to Livia. Mama. Why are they yelling? Because they don't know the story yet, she whispered, kissing his hair. But we're going to tell them. Clara opened the door first, stepping out with regal composure. The crowd quieted slightly. She was still Clara Moreau, after all. Then Daniel stepped out and held out his hand. Not to Clara. To Livia. She hesitated only a second before taking it. Theo's small hand tucked in hers. The flashbulbs exploded. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And then Daniel did something no one expected. He knelt. Right there on the red carpet, in front of the world, he knelt before his son. Hey Theo, he said, voice thick but clear. Remember what we talked about? About being brave. Theo nodded, wide-eyed. Well, Daniel said, placing a hand gently on his son's chest, right over his heart. This is where bravery lives. And tonight, I'm going to be brave for you. He stood, took Theo's hand in one of his, Livia's in the other, and walked forward, not toward the gala entrance, but to the press room Clara had secured, just off the main hall. Inside, a dozen journalists waited, cameras ready, pens poised. Daniel closed the door. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Livia stepped forward, Theo at her side. My son's name is Theo Moreau, she said, voice clear and steady. He is 3 years old. He loves bears, blueberries, and bedtime stories. And for 3 years I raised him alone, because the man who gave him life chose to walk away. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel stepped beside her, his presence solid, unwavering. I did walk away, he said, voice rough with emotion. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid. Afraid of failing him. Afraid of losing everything I'd built. And in that fear, I failed him anyway. He looked down at Theo, who gazed up at him with complete trust. But today, Daniel continued, voice breaking, I choose him, not as a secret, not as a scandal, as my son, my heart, my second chance. Clara moved to stand beside them, not behind, not apart, but with. And I stand with them, she said, her voice ringing with quiet authority. Not as a wronged wife, but as a woman who finally understands that love isn't about possession. It's about protection. And Theo deserves to be protected by everyone who claims to love him. A reporter raised a hand. Mr. Moreau, with your resignation from Moreau Global, how will you provide for him? Daniel didn't flinch. I may lose my title tomorrow, but I'll never lose my role as his father. And that's the only title that matters now. Another voice. Ms. Mendez, do you expect financial support? A public acknowledgement. Livia looked straight into the camera. I expect nothing but honesty, and the right for my son to know his father. Not as a name in headlines, but as the man who reads him stories and holds his hand when he's scared. Tears filled Theo's eyes. Papa, are you sad? Daniel dropped to his knees again, pulling him into a hug. No, meu filho. I'm happy, because I finally get to be your papa for real. In that moment, the room fell utterly silent. Not out of shock, but out of respect, because what they were witnessing wasn't a scandal. It was redemption. Later that night, as the gala swirled on without them, the three of them, Livia, Daniel, and Theo, walked out a side exit, Clara beside them like a quiet guardian. No cameras, no shouts, just the cool night air and the sound of a child's laughter. And as they disappeared into the city lights, no one knew what came next. Legal battles, public scrutiny, rebuilding from ashes. But one thing was certain. Inside, Theo sat cross-legged on a sunlit rug, showing Clara how to build a tower with alphabet blocks. She traded boardrooms for story hour, and though her hands were softer now, her eyes held a peace they hadn't in years. The bell above the door chimed. Daniel stepped in, sleeves rolled, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. He'd sold his penthouse, bought a modest apartment 2 blocks away, and traded shareholder calls for preschool drop-offs. He still wore his father's watch, but now it told time for doctor's appointments and bedtime, not board meetings. "Hey," he said softly, handing Clara her coffee. "Black, 1 sugar, just how she liked it." She smiled. "He's been waiting for you since."